Chapter 8, Section 6 is the law of cosines, and I think we've got a typo in our notes. I don't think that should be there. Again, angle A is across from side A, angle C is across from side C, and angle B is across from side B. And it says for any triangle with side lengths A, B, and C, A squared equals B squared minus 2BC cosine of A. And you'll see we have three law of cosines there. They're basically all the same thing. They're just picking each of the three different angles in a triangle. And the thing you need to realize is that this side, little a, and is across from that angle. So the side is across from the angle. A squared equals B squared plus C squared minus 2BC cosine of that angle. So this first one, we're trying to find XZ. I'm going to put an X right there. And remember, this side and this angle are right across from each other. So we will have X squared. We're going to call these sides B and C, and it doesn't matter which one's which, equals, should probably put a number in there, 30 squared plus 35 squared minus 2 times 30 times 35 times the cosine of 110. And we just substituted those numbers in. From here, we can just multiply this whole thing out. 30 squared plus 35 squared minus 2 times 30 times 35 times the cosine of 110. So it's a long formula. Substitute your numbers in. And then we end up with x squared equals 2,843. We want to take the square root of that, so I do second square root, second answer, and we end up with that side equaling 53.3. I'm just going to call it 53. I'm going to skip next to letter C. This one's very much like the one we just did. We're trying to find DE. The angle and the side are across from each other. And remember, in our formula, that angle and that side are across from each other. So we will have x squared equals 18 squared plus 16 squared minus 2 times 18 times 16 times the cosine of 21. And notice each of the other sides are squared, and you multiply, subtract 2 times each of those sides, and then the cosine of that angle. So this whole thing we can enter in our calculator. 18 squared plus 16 squared minus 2 times 18 times 16 times the cosine of 21. And that becomes x squared equals right about 42. And then we do second square root and second answer. And x ends up being right about 6.5. And the third one that is like this example is letter E. We're trying to find this side. So we will have x squared equals 4 squared plus 10 squared minus 2 times 4 times 10 times the cosine of 34. Well, entering that in our calculator, 4 squared plus 10 squared minus 2 times 4 times 10 times the cosine of 34. Apparently I did something wrong there. That equals 49.67. So I'm going to round to about 50. And then we square root, hit second in that negative, it pulls your answer back, and we end up with x equaling right about 7. Now these three that I skipped, this time we're going to find the angle. Now this is the angle we are looking for, angle Q. So we need to use this side, the 5.9, by itself. So we will have 5.9 squared equals 9.6 squared plus 10.5 squared minus 2 times 5.9 times 10.5 times the cosine of Q. Sorry, we're running out of room there. And I'm going to work these two things out as numbers. I guess these three things out as numbers. There's three different numbers we need to come up with. 5.9 squared is 34.81. 9.6 squared plus 10.5 squared is 102.66. All right, I'm going to rewrite this because I'm running out of room. 34.81 equals 102.66 minus 2 times 5.9 times 10.5. which is 123.9 cosine of Q. And this is where you have to be very, very careful in solving this equation. You do not combine these two numbers. You first of all have to subtract the 102.66 from both sides. So 34.81 minus 102.66, and that becomes negative 67.85 equals negative 123.9 cosine of Q. Notice that negative 123.9 is multiplied by the cosine of Q. So we need to divide both sides by the negative 123.9. These will disappear. And then we need to do our inverse cosine. So the inverse cosine, negative 67.85 divided by negative 123.9. Divided these two and did the inverse cosine, and I get an error. Oh, I think I did a subtract rather than the negative there. Okay, now let's try this. 57.79. So that tells us that that angle, when we did the inverse cosine, that angle equals 57 degrees. Now, if that one is confusing, we have two more examples. Let's take a look at these next two. Angle K, that's the side that's across from it. So this is the side that's all by itself on the one side of the equal sign. So we will have 8 squared equals 10 squared plus 15 squared minus 2 times 10 times 15 times the cosine of q. There are three numbers we need to work out. That one, and that one. Those three numbers we need to work out. 8 squared is 64. 10 squared plus 15 squared is 325. And 2 times 10 times 15 is minus 300 cosine of q. And sometimes I like to cover this part up because that's what you deal with last. We need to subtract 325 from both sides. 64 subtract 325 is negative 261. Carefully your negative signs. That equals negative 300 times the cosine of q, and then dividing both sides by negative 300. You can divide that number and get a decimal if you want, or you can do the inverse cosine. Negative 261 divided by negative 300. That becomes 29.54. So this angle would be right about 30 degrees. Hopefully that one was a little bit better. And we have one more example. Angle R is the one we're trying to find.
Could I have your attention, please? Caden Kempker and Chelsea Ball, please come to the office for messages. Caden Kempker and Chelsea Ball. Thank you.
Sorry about that. This side will be across from the angle, or this side will be all by itself. So 11 squared equals 13 squared plus 7 squared minus 2 times 13 times 7 times the cosine of r. We need to come up with three numbers. 11 squared is 121. 13 squared plus 7 squared is 218. And 2 times 13 times 7 is 182 cosine of r. From here, we subtract the 218 from both sides, and we end up with negative 97 equals negative 182 times the cosine of r. Solving that, you divide both sides by negative 2, and then you do the inverse cosine. Inverse cosine, negative 97 divided by negative 182, 57.79. So that angle R, I'm going to round up to 58 degrees. And the last one is Sailing Club has planned a triangular race course. We are asked to find this. This is the first type of question that we have. X squared equals 3.1 squared plus 3.9 squared minus 2 times 3.1 times 3.9 times the cosine of 45. And once you get those numbers in there, it's just a matter of entering it into your calculator. 3.1 squared plus 3.9 squared minus 2 times 3.1 times 3.9 times the cosine of 45, excuse me. And then we square root that answer, and that ends up being right about 2.8, doesn't say what our units are, 2.8 units long.